Forbes India and Legrand present Data-Driven World.
Hello and welcome to Forbes India and Legrand presents Data-Driven World. My name is Manu Balachandran, and joining me this afternoon are some stalwarts from the world of business. We have Mr. Sanjay Motwani, the business head, Legrand Data Center Solutions. Mr. Ramesh Jampula, VP IT India and APJC Regional at Dell Technologies. Mr. Harnath Babu, the CIO at KPMG. Mr. Anand Patil, Senior Director, Systems Engineering, Cisco India and SAARC. Mr. Anil Nama, CIO at CtrlS. And Mr. Bhavesh Lakhani, CIO, Firstsource Solutions. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us this evening. Now, it's been a tough few years for all of us, with the pandemic more or less behind us and businesses swimming back to normalcy. What's clear is that there has been an accelerated digital transformation of businesses across the world, leading to an explosion of data. With more and more consumers and businesses using cloud services, data centers have become the hub for digital ecosystems. IT is not just an enabler, but a key player that provides a huge competitive edge, prompting companies to be more responsive in dealing with the growth of their IT infrastructure. CIOs, meanwhile, must not only think of technology, but also in terms of consumer behavior and consumer access points to see how one can adapt and modify their data center infrastructure. The Indian data center market is growing at some 11%, and this demand will continue to increase, driven by surges in cloud adoption, digital transformation, and social media usage, as well as new Industry 4.0 technologies like 5G and the Internet of Things, AI. That means India is only getting started when it comes to data centers. To know how businesses across the spectrum can build agile data centers in the new normal, let me turn to our panelists and seek their opening comments on how the past 2 years have brought about a fundamental shift in the way we do business and the impact that has had on data. Let me start with Bhavesh and move to the others.
Hi, thank you, Manu. So again, you brought out a very pertinent point in today's world and how technology is evolving, and with that data center is evolving. The whole mindset is changing, right? So build versus buy versus go to the specialist is the paradigm shift that I've seen. And coming from banking, where the good old days we used to host our own data centers, and then came the era of cloud, the hyperscalers, and then you decided to go with a hybrid. And even at Firstsource, I mean, we are digital first organization. We believe in doing what we do best and adopting technology and also delighting customers. So from a data center perspective, we have a very robust strategy which encompasses a public cloud, a private cloud, which is, of course, we can call it a hybrid, and some part of it which is managed services, right? So this, according to us, is the right recipe in terms of focusing on whatever you do best while letting the experts manage the part of the infrastructure. I hope that answers your question, Manu.
Yes, thanks, Bhavesh. Anil, your thoughts?
Yeah, so from a data center perspective, we have seen ballistic growth. When the COVID started, for some time, I mean, we were also on a back foot from a data center side, how to support our customers. There were lockdowns. Data center was declared as a critical place to work. We had to organize work shift, and overnight we had to take over support, basic support of our colocation customers also. But as COVID, I mean, it came towards its last 2 quarters, we saw a tentative planning to shift all the traditional on-prem loads into the data center. So the new mantra, I mean, whatever you call it as hybrid cloud, public cloud is, go to a data center, take some good bandwidth there, use your servers, use cloud servers, or maybe some SaaS application, and that has sort of led to explosion in the data centers. And then, of course, you have the global supply chain problems coming in, and therefore, these days, as we progress, we are moving towards scarcity of
Right.
or towards the availability of these systems.
Absolutely. We'll speak on that a little later. Anand, your opening thoughts on how the past 2 years have fundamentally changed, and especially from the context of data.
Look, I think one thing that the last 18 months have proven is that for businesses, anything that can be delivered digitally should be delivered digitally, because that's how consumers and customers expect it to be. What turned out to start with as an easy way to order groceries during the lockdown has now become a way of life, permeated even our professional lives. And I think that, combined with the fact that we live in a world today that even a single second of delay in loading a web page leads to an increase in a bounce rate of 125%, it's extremely important that organizations start to control their application experience. And that means that they need to start modernizing their applications. Whereas to host these modern applications has to be in data centers, because this amount of data that now you're generating and developing, the applications are getting more distributed, containerized, modernized. All of that is leading to a massive, massive explosion in the backend in terms of the amount of data that now needs to get managed.
Absolutely. Mr. Harnath, your thoughts on that?
So Manu, thanks a lot for the question. And I think last years have been, I would say, a transformation era for most of the organizations. And what we have seen from a data center perspective, obviously, what was more convenient for most of the CIOs to host, on-premise, wasn't the fact anymore. Primarily because when you were working from remote, you had to provide services which are not available through your data center. So as an example, we are having this conversation on a virtual platform. Suddenly the whole world had to move to a virtual platform. So obviously cloud was one of the key, I would say, vehicles where these sort of solutions could be hosted. Second was the demand towards newer types of services, especially during the times of lockdown, or the way organizations are moving towards digital transformation. I think the whole agenda of IT modernization obviously is being driven by cloud. So I would say, on a lighter note, we have decided to leave our problems to Anil rather than hosting it by ourselves. So I think most of us, in our context, right, have decided to move to the cloud primarily for workloads which could be managed by hyperscalers or by colo data centers, right? And as we see in the future, I think a hybrid cloud environment would be ideal for any enterprise. You may want to continue to run your legacy applications on premise, but most of your workloads which primarily can be addressed by a cloud environment, be it SaaS, PaaS, or IaaS, you would want to push it to the cloud. So that's what we see from a cloud perspective, or the future of data center perspective.
Ramesh, do you agree with that? I mean, your opening thoughts on the hybrid cloud environment. How is it shaping up?
Manu, first of all, good afternoon, and thank you for having me today. You had primarily like two aspects that I wanted to touch upon, right? One is the data aspect. Data continues to be the new oil of the digital era. There's no doubt that there is a growing importance and significance of how do we analyze data and gain deeper insights to make intelligent decisions. There's no doubt about it. And over the past couple of years, data continued to explode with edge devices, telecom, IoT, gaining a lot of traction. So data continues to be at the center of a lot of what we do from a data perspective. The second thing, which is also Harnath has briefly touched upon, is data center capacity is expected to continue to grow both from a core and edge driven by digital acceleration. And especially with the 5G, 6G, and Wi-Fi 6 coming into play, there's no doubt that model-based softwares are expected to be leveraged in bringing efficient, resilient, and sustainable data center capacity online in a much faster way. And this is a great timing as we get ready to expect edge to be deployed at scale. And the pandemic has only accelerated some of these things. So from a Dell perspective, we are at the center of enabling a lot of these capabilities by leveraging the right technologies.
Absolutely. Sanjay, is that your case as well? Are you at the center of all of these changes happening?
Hey, thank you for having me here. I'm being on the other side of the table. We've been on the supply side, so which has obviously been touch wood very good. But having said that, what the last 2 years, what we've seen is that the discussions, obviously the demand for even remote management and monitoring has taken off. Given the fact, I think Anand touched upon the fact about the consumer demand, etc. Given the fact that the consumer demands have taken off, in the business responses have to be in terms of how quickly they can respond, etc. And obviously, so the discussions have largely revolved around in terms of improving efficiency of the infrastructure, how quickly they can identify, let's say, spare capacities. Then the discussions have largely, again, also revolved around the fact that you are broadening and increasing the footprint in terms of security aspects. So I would say efficiency, remote network monitoring and management, and security have been, I would say, pretty much these are the three topics in the past couple of years which have really kind of bubbled and surfaced up in far more seriousness.
Certainly. Now, Sanjay, for you, what do you think? I mean, why is agility in the data center today's new normal? I mean, what do you think are the reasons?
I think consumer is the biggest reason. To be honest, the consumer demands, expectations have changed. And I've said this before, that the consumer is defining the new WWW as to what he or she wants, when they want, what they want. And the businesses have to respond to the consumers. I think the statistics just shared, I think by Anand again, was that a lag of 1 second delay is leading to a 125% bounce rates, etc. So that's what the businesses have to gear for. Now, if you're not responding to your consumers, and given the fact today that the consumers are not brand loyal, their ability to hop across services, brands, it just happens overnight. So the quality of service which has to be delivered has to be extremely high. Now, in this demanding environment, the data centers have to be agile. And what we mean by agile is a ability to reach out to newer footprints, to be obviously to access newer markets, be able to upgrade infrastructure quickly in terms of to respond to the demands again in terms of what the consumer is expecting. I mean, from my point of view, yeah. So that's basically, I feel that agility is pretty much the bedrock today.
Absolutely. Anand, let me come to you. In what ways do you think the post-COVID data centers will be more flexible and on the edge?
Thanks, Manu. Sorry, I had a little bit of a blip there, so I dropped out, but I'm back now. Okay. So just to answer that question, let's take a step back and see what's happened again over the last 24 months. The first thing is hybrid work has become a reality. And I'm not just talking about working remotely or working from home. Today, employees need the flexibility to be able to work from the office or from the car or from wherever they are, and be productive at the same time. So the second is, like I said, digital has become a way of life. And it's no wonder, out of the 1.2 billion mobile subscribers that we have in India, 750 million have smartphones, and most of them with a 4G connection. The third is, if you think about the digitization agenda that the government is driving, everything from citizen services to skilling and education to agriculture, national health, logistics, absolutely every initiative has technology as its pivot. So it's no surprise that government themselves are also increasing their IT budgets by over 12% this year. And if you think about what is the common factor that drives success among all of these trends, these initiatives, it is the experience of the application. These trends combined have led to a massive move to modernize, like I said, the applications in the backend, to make them more agile, more portable, more mobile friendly. And that in turn has led to a massive explosion again in the demand for data center space. JLL predicts that by the year 2023, India will have doubled its data center capacity to cross the 1 gigawatt mark. But data centers need to be a little bit more flexible and agile to be able to handle all of this. So I can think of 4 things that they need to be addressing. One is obviously hyperscale, because they need to be able to scale both vertically and horizontally. Second is edge, as we start to see newer use cases like autonomous cars, augmented and virtual reality, or even safe cities for that matter. Those kind of use cases coming in. Data sovereignty and security is also becoming a pretty important topic these days. Localization of data and regulation of that. And the last thing I'll talk about is sustainability. As all organizations start to move towards their net zero goals reducing their impact on the environment. Sustainability becomes a key aspect of what they do, and data centers are a huge contributor to what goals they can achieve from a sustainability point of view.
Absolutely, I think very fascinating, very interesting topic points. Before I move to Ramesh, Bhavesh, your thoughts on what Anand just spoke about. Do you agree that this is the situation where we find ourselves in today, and going forward, hyperscale, edge, data sovereignty, all of this will be matters of concern?
Absolutely, Anand, I think summed it up. But just to add a couple of points, yes, data sovereignty and data privacy is becoming very important now as we go forward from a customer privacy perspective as well. And ESG again is one topic where most data center providers try to, uh, I mean, in a world where everybody is almost equal, this is where they will get some advantage in terms of standing out, right? But yeah, scaling out on the edge, like he mentioned a few examples of the autonomous car or even metaverse for that matter, right? And then all culminates along with the advent of 5G, 6G, uh, which we are talking about earlier. So I completely agree with Anand, and this is the way forward. And again, I reiterate my
Right.
point that data center providers are becoming specialists, and they've kind of consistently and repetitively uh, learned how to deliver what's required, right? So,
Absolutely. Now, let me bring in Ramesh here. Ramesh, the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, with the onslaught of advances based on software automation and artificial intelligence, heightened the imperative to accelerate the development of data centers, while also reducing their reliance on human labor. How are we sort of making greater use of digital tools in this new normal?
So, Manu, I think, as I said, the pandemic has placed a premium on flexibility, and this is accelerating the ongoing shift to new architectures and software defined programmable infrastructures. So, organizations that have been studying these opportunities well before the pandemic are actually the ones who are leading this space. So, digital growth and acceleration are here to stay. And with that realization comes the need for all of us as digital leaders to embrace the technologies and trends that will give our organizations a clear advantage. So, a couple of examples I will tell how, from a Dell perspective, we are making greater use of digital tools in the new normal. So Dell is strategically shifting its business more towards subscription and outcome oriented models, as a service models, right? And that has gained significant traction. Customers are no longer interested in buying huge infrastructures without knowing whether they'll consume everything or not. So there's a lot more traction towards as a service models, more so after pandemic. And that's one of the areas that gives the flexibility for the customers to be able to go up and down from a data center infrastructure perspective. Also, from a tools and technologies, with the global workforce transformation and a lot of us going into a work from home kind of a model, Dell had a unique advantage of working from home for like almost 10 years. We have the flexibility for our team members. So we have developed various tools and technologies over the past couple of years also that have really enabled us to be able to bring in our team members across APJC and India to stay connected, yet be able to engage with each other. So I think both from a data center perspective as well as from our own team members, what is vitally important in the current situation and post pandemic particularly is how we are leveraging software automation and digital transformation to continue to embrace this new normal.
Interesting points. Harnath, in that sense, how can sort of cloud computing foster business agility? Your thoughts?
So Manu, I think if you really look at cloud models, right? I think cloud obviously has become an integral part of the modernization of the whole IT environment. So the whole transformation agenda that most of the organizations are driving today are primarily being driven by technology, and certainly cloud is coming to be very handy in the transformation. And if you actually look at the priorities of CIOs, I think it's actually getting mapped with CEOs' priorities, primarily in areas like where you want to have faster time to market, where technology obviously is required, or you want to services that are being rolled out to the market very quickly, or you want to come up with newer models of services, right? or you want to get into cost efficiency, especially when you're running the organization which is completely digital. And the new norm, if you've seen the way customer demands have changed, and many of the changes that have actually happened in last 2 years, primarily the consumption patterns have changed of customers. Right? I think most of those patterns continue to stick around. So the newer business models will call in for better efficiency, and both from a cost as well as security as well as risk reduction, because the more and more you are online and the more you are trying to get your data, to the points earlier mentioned by Bhavesh and the other panelists, right? And most importantly, when you're trying to roll out a service, I think it's important for the technology teams to consider the comfort of developers, right? At the end of the day, the development teams have to deliver, and if you have to really leverage what is available out of the box from the cloud perspective, obviously those capabilities can be leveraged, right? So just to kind of coming to your question, I think there is going to be enough focus on cloud investments, that we see. And I think one of the studies that I was reading, it's around 20 to 40% of the apps that we are looking at in future are going to be cloud native apps, right? And if you want to get better agility from a business perspective, I think it's important to leverage capabilities of the cloud, like natural language processing, chatbots, or facial recognition, or data analytics per se. I think these are the kind of services which can be leveraged out of the box straight from the cloud. You don't really need to reinvent the whole wheel, right? And most importantly, to my earlier point of risk reduction or security, you don't need to really invest a lot from a security perspective. When you're on the cloud, you don't really need to invest in practically all that hardware that you would typically do in your own on-premise data center. So I think you can actually leverage the investment that is already being done by the cloud service providers, and plus obviously you have to add your own security layers on top of it, right? So I think some of these points, if you consider, I think there's a bit of agility that comes in, right? And the idea is organizations will have to also start looking at changing the model, or preparing themselves to a newer way of working, or a newer way of delivering services. I mean, if you're going towards the cloud, or newer way, or maybe you're getting into a newer technology transformation using cloud, you'll have to also start focusing on changing the business model per se, which is very let's say, or changing the technology itself, which is basically supporting the business. So I think uh, cloud is here to stay. Only thing is considering the need of the services, or the infrastructure availability, you'll end up actually having either an edge compute, or let's say edge cloud, or you will actually get onto a cloud. So I think one of those models will definitely prevail.
Just a follow up to that, are sort of companies, legacy companies or companies otherwise, are they investing so much into that, into cloud, into enhancing their cloud capabilities?
Yes, I think if you actually see, one of the biggest challenge from a cloud perspective is the whole talent gap, right? I think if you actually see from our perspective also, we've been investing a lot in terms of cloud capabilities. We have in fact we have done away with many of the legacy applications which we could do away with, and transformed some of those applications into cloud native, moved ourselves from, let's say, on-premise applications to SaaS based wherever there was a possibility. And certainly I think the idea is, if you can leverage what is available out of the box, might as well leverage that. Just to give you a perspective, last 2 years, from 10% of the footprint on the cloud, we have actually migrated to almost 55 to 60% on the cloud. And in next 2 years, we intend to be there at least 85 to 90%. I think that's the amount of, I would say, exposure that we're looking at from a cloud perspective, not primarily because, we want to do it, because that's the need, right? I mean, the new applications that we are developing for our clients, or the services that we are offering to our clients, those are all being driven on on those are being offered on cloud, because there is a need of a scalability today. Let's say you have an application that is servicing, let's say, 10 clients, and you want to host 100 clients, let's say after 6 months, right? So you can't really go and sit and provision for infrastructure on premise. And plus the cloud native capabilities that I was referring to, be it AI, ML, and there are products that we're building on the cloud which leverage the cloud native capabilities, primarily around AI and machine learning, especially, and analytics as well, right? So I think yes, companies are investing towards cloud capabilities, and one of the key challenge which I see and we have obviously experienced is the cloud, the whole talent gap. I think that
Okay.
needs to is investment for sure.
I think we'll come to that talent gap point in just a bit. Sanjay, I think you wanted to sort of add to the point about investments into cloud. Go on.
Okay, so whatever's been said is bang on. No questions on that. But there's something interesting which I learned in the past 30 to 45 days in my travels outside, specifically on the cloud. And it was quite interesting. What I picked up is the fact that obviously there is a lot of motivation to go into the cloud. All points which have been mentioned are bang on. But organizations which have moved to the cloud, let's say, have been in the cloud for about 5 odd years, they have now realized that beyond a certain scale, it does not make sense to stay in the cloud. They would like to shift some of their load back onto on-prem. So that's the trend or trickle which has started. And the reasons which were mentioned for this was one, is that A, was lack of transparency. B, because of the fact that the demands on the cloud providers has been so high in terms of scaling their infrastructure, so they are changing their infrastructure, which means that the users of the cloud services, organizations who've deployed or using their services, they have to upgrade their technologies, tools, skills to be able to match up with the space at which the cloud service providers are also upgrading their infrastructure. So there seems to be a gap at the pace which the cloud guys are growing themselves, and therefore, if they are growing at a certain pace, they expect their clients also to upgrade their skills, their technologies, etc. So there has been some kind of a repatriation, reverse flow which has started. So this was very interesting to note that. So I said, okay, I might as well share that, which I learned.
Interesting. Anybody else has been noticing that trend? Anybody like to add to that point that Sanjay just made?
Yeah, I'd like to. And yes, completely agree. A lot of repatriation due to lack of transparency, or also, the updates that keep happening. But yes, we already alluded to the hybrid cloud model where you can build a private cloud. So, that will be like an ideal situation where you have on-prem workloads. Harnath mentioned, right, that a lot of it will, for him, will go this year. You test it in the private cloud and then pick SaaS as much as possible, and then if not, PaaS and IaaS is always the option. But completely agree with Sanjay. A lot of repatriation has been seen recently, primarily due to costs.
Interesting turn of events. Let me bring in Anil here. Anil, you know, sorry. So, how can organizations improve operational efficiency and future-proof their data centers?
Well, so taking all the conversations which are happening, there are two key trends which are there. One is the customer choices or his behavior is changing, and operational efficiency in that sense would be the minimum wastage in terms of time, or in terms of revenue, or in terms of cost that you put in place to cater to your customer needs. Given those, yes, cloud is a good choice. Let's bifurcate cloud in a hybrid way into private cloud and public clouds. So there are hyperscalers which come in. You do a lot of optimization there, because in the sense of you're going to market and being able to test your ideas, that becomes from, I mean, it's days only. And then when you leverage the SaaS PaaS there, it then starts to speak out. Taking and plotting the second trend which has been brought out by the esteemed panel, which is reverse migration. So we as data center have seen a Dell, a Cisco grown to a level where they have brought in their own Kubernetes stacks or analytics stacks, and these comes pre-bundled in the same operational model, in the same OpEx sense. And I mean, if you take the certifications traditionally, an OS guy, a Windows OS guy, or a SUSE, Linux OS guy, who was sort of forced to become an Azure admin or from a talent perspective, can now grow up in their own way to a OpenShift or a Red Hat next version or a SUSE Rancher. And these talents or pools are also developing to bring this capability to the on-prem systems. So, from an operational perspective, this is what is going on. When you come down a slight lower level onto the data center perspective, it's about power, cooling, and the amount or the cost of this power cooling to the customer. That is where a lot of green energies have started to come. For example, if you take our own case, Mumbai DC, we wrapped one building around in 1 megawatt worth of solar. We thought we'll save or make some money in terms of electricity. But we got a lot more benefit because the solar panel sort of radiated the heat out. So our cooling cost came down. Another example could be, recent example could be once again in Mumbai. We got a call from the green people, and they said they had come up with an innovative solution to actually convert wastewater into good water.
Okay.
So we said, why not? We have a DC campus, you are consuming like 1 million liters per day. So we said, let's try out. So the MLD plant in Navi Mumbai, which was putting water inside the creek, we brought that water into the DC and we put this plant. It gives a soft water, which is non-corrosive, that runs your cooling. So within 3 months of that test, we were able to let go of 1 million liters per day potable water as a supply and switch on to the MLD water. Now, that for me is a much more operational or a return in the system than could be possible. And it's not something that has come from an IT design. It's not something that has come in from, let's say, a planned thing. It is because of all these collaborations which are happening out there in the cloud. People reach out. People reach out with their innovative ideas. There are startups which are there. There are earlier companies which are there. I can give you another example of a very established company. So we have this data center in Hyderabad. It was running on like our home, split AC. We couldn't put it water cool systems. So they came in with a solution they deployed in Brazil, where your hot pipe which goes out in the split AC, they put a pipe cover on top of it and they run cold water. What we found was that we were saving close to 17% of electricity because of that, because your outside units need not run now at 100%. So their electrical consumption of outside cooling fans came down by 30%. So this is what is happening in terms of the underlying structure. Let's go a step up. Let's talk about the web scale data centers. So of late, if you would have seen, there is a new technology which has come in. One, of course, is the SD-WAN, where you are no longer dependent on the MPLS or sort of central switching. Now, with SD-WAN, there is a new revolution which is coming in known as DWDM, which means if you want a 10 gig pipe between two data centers or two locations, which was, very exorbitantly priced when we used to take DC connectivity, it is now becoming more and more affordable. Even Government of India has spent a lot there. They are bringing fibers along the national highways. We have RailTel, we have got Power Grid. Everybody is putting a fiber and connecting these cities.
Right.
So suddenly your DC and edge, from that efficiency point of view, you could have bursts. So when you are going from 1 to 100 hits, or you are launching a, let's say, a CBSC results, right? A 1 is to 100,000 hits. You have the bandwidth available to cater to that load. So it's going hand in hand. All the sectors are coming up. It's not only the hyperscaler, it's the on-prem supplier, it's the bandwidth suppliers, it's the data center, which all four combined are creating to this operational efficiencies that we are talking about.
Interesting. I think a lot of great points made there. Right. Let me come back to Bhavesh here. Bhavesh, regional data centers have continued to expand at a breakneck pace. of course, bolstered by the health context and the critical benefits of more geographically distributed IT infrastructure. Will this trend continue to intensify in the coming years? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the trends are showing that the way we are digitizing, and we alluded to the Arogya Setu app, or even healthcare apps, and even from a banking perspective, how banks are going to tier 3, tier 4 cities. The distribution is becoming easier. People have tasted blood now, right? The digitization is leading to a better reach. So absolutely, this trend will continue, and regional data centers will provide that, uh, you know, uh, that required load sharing, so to speak. Uh,
Anand, do you agree with that? Do you think regional data centers is something that's going to see a lot of traction in the coming months?
Look, I think it also depends on the use case. And while I agree with whatever Bhavesh has said, a couple of examples that I can take which will require regional data centers. One is obviously the requirement for the data to be stored as close to the source as possible. That might be for sovereignty or security reasons, privacy reasons. It could even be for edge computing reasons, right? So the example that I was giving of the safe city, when the camera actually is a smart camera can capture something that's happening on the road, it's easier to send it to the closest location to get that image processed and send an alert if needed, rather than send it back to a central data center which is lying somewhere else. So I think yes, it really depends on the use case. There are definite requirements which will see the proliferation of regional data centers, and the least amongst which is obviously the ability to get as much land as you can to build these modern data centers. That becomes a lot more efficient once you start going into the interlands.
Absolutely. Ramesh, one quick question to you. What role does automation play in the journey of digital transformation?
So automation is a key aspect of digital transformation. If we look at some of the examples, even within Dell, over the past couple of years, especially, even within the supply chain ecosystem, we have a number of use cases where we are able to automate a lot of decision making, and particularly in the current supply chain disruption, where the demand planning versus supply planning, the parts availability, etc., plays a pivotal role. The investments that we have made both in data analytics as well as the ability to automate a lot of deeper insights and decision making has enabled us to get greater insights on how the demand planning is shaping up, and how we are able to leverage that towards a better supply chain and better manufacturing, right, to enable us to ship our products to customers in a timely manner. So automation is at the center of a lot of digital transformation work that we are doing at Dell, and supply chain is just one example that I have given, where we have definitely leveraged automation to enable successful story for our customers.
Absolutely. Harnath, I know Anil sort of alluded to this earlier, but why has sort of data center sustainability now become a priority?
So, Manu, if you actually look at some of the trends, right? So, globally, data center capacity obviously is growing as the consumption of technology is increasing, and certainly with the digital transformation being taken up by most of the organizations, you require the data center capacity for sure, right? And the more, and again, Anil gave very good examples in terms of how they are working on sustainability. But if you actually see, not all data centers are actually the green ones, right? They are actually generating greenhouse gases, right? In a different
Right.
way. If you actually also look at one of the studies done by IDC, approximately by 2025, global data load across the world will be almost 175 zettabytes, right? Which means that we're talking about huge amount of data which has to be processed by these data centers. And you can imagine the amount of emissions that these data centers will be having, right? And if you also see the number of data centers that have grown in last 5 years, obviously that they have quadrupled, and again we did speak about the growth of data center within the country itself, right? So with the increase in the demand, from a data center perspective, I think it's important to certainly focus on building up the right infrastructure from a data center point of view. I mean, organization, especially if you're running your own data center or you're hosting in a colo, I think it's important for you to also see whether there are best practices being leveraged by the data center service provider, or you yourselves are practicing the best in terms of sustainability. So some of the examples could be, let's say, you're using green computing practices, like in terms of whether you're able to track the power consumption, you're able to design a data center in such a way that the heat dissipation happens properly. You're able to monitor the temperature in the data center. And again, I think if the role of a CIO, I would say, is to also see how you can continue to run infrastructure which is more modern, rather than running the older data older infrastructure. So typically, if your infra is more than 5, 6, or 7 years old, it doesn't make sense, because you end up actually spending more money than if you end up refreshing, right? So I think some of those initiatives necessarily have to be taken, and possibly you have to replace all the legacy hardware. I mean, to my earlier point, right? And if there is a possibility of investing into AI-enabled monitoring tools, right? If you are able to integrate your building management system to your data center, monitoring infrastructure itself. So I think that itself, that will also will give you kind of an edge in terms of managing the overall power consumption, as well as you are able to contribute back by consuming lesser power. Now, and another reason why most of the organizations are looking at this, because I think at a country level, most of the countries have taken the net zero or zero emission targets. I think most of the organizations also have actually gone into the same, right? So I think there are mandates, and certainly I think it's important for organizations, be it individual organization or data center service providers, to actually look at sustainability as one of the key priority for either building or running data centers.
Interesting. Just moving from the sustainability part, Anand, how are data centers ensuring better protection against attacks, and what sort of advanced encryption technologies will business rely on in the future?
Thanks, Manu. So I think, so if you think, let's just step back again and recap what we know so far. Okay, on one side, users are getting more mobile, more distributed than ever before. And at the same time, they expect their applications to perform in the same predictable way, whether they're working in the office or standing in the garage. On the other hand, applications, as we've heard so far, they need to respond to changing user preferences at the drop of a hat. So there is modernization, cloud native transformation. They're a lot more modular today, and there are a lot more dependencies. We heard about the fact that they're getting a lot more hybrid between on-prem and cloud. They might even exist across multiple data centers for that matter. Now, take a look at the scenario. On one side, you've got distributed users. On the other side, you've got distributed apps. And in the middle, a lot of times, the interconnecting network is the public internet. This is a virtual playground, a sweet spot for cyber criminals. Right? The surface area available for them to attack has just exploded. There are so many ways to get in. In fact, CERTIN, which is the Computer Emergency Response Team for India, has reported just in the year 2022 so far, we've had over 2 lakh cybersecurity incidents. And I think data centers can go a long way in terms of helping us protect our data and our applications. I think on the basics side, everything is already in place. I mean, it's obvious that you have to focus on the basics, like the physical security, the network security, segmentation, encryption, and so on and so forth. In addition, I think to take into account the fact that applications are now a lot more distributed, and that the lowest denominator of the application has today become a container or a microservice, it needs to be protected at that level, right? Also, now that the applications are not more transient and mobile, AES and so on are fairly robust, but they are robust for today's capabilities that the cyber criminals have. So if you think forward and think ahead in terms of quantum computing and what that brings to the table, blockchain, for example, as a capability, there is definitely a real risk of being compromised in the future. So as you go forward, it's important that you start to think about newer forms of encryption that are quantum proof, using, for example, lattice-based cryptography or homomorphic encryption and so on. That is something that most application and data owners need to start thinking about, because as computing techniques evolve, it will be critical for encryption techniques also to start to keep up, if not become better, to protect their data from compromise.
Interesting. I want to ask Sanjay, who's on the other side. Sanjay, how are data centers ensuring better protection against attacks? And what sort of advanced encryption technologies will businesses rely on now?
See, on the security side, we are not on the security side, but we provide, I would say, physical security tools in that context. So obviously the 2FA part has come in. So when we try and provide solutions to the data center operators, managers, they are looking at it largely from the physical access point, not from the software, because A, we are not skilled in that domain. B, I mean, they don't want any outsider to be, walking into their domain on the software side unless and until they're absolutely sure. So they'd rather do that themselves. So our experience has largely been on the infrastructure side than on the software side.
Interesting. Let me, Ramesh, what modernization tips and strategies would you have for building an agile data center infrastructure?
Thank you, Manu. Efficient data center design is an imperative in order to achieve better efficiency, performance, as well as to enhance our customer experience. So from a Dell perspective, our modernization strategies like accelerating our as a service efforts are certainly centered around enabling agile data center infrastructure. I'll just give a couple of examples of as how Dell is continuing to invest in modernizing and what are some of the tips and tricks, right? So the basic thing, our cloud infrastructure as a service solution, which we are enabling our enterprises to scale easily, reduce the costs, and increase the performance of business critical infrastructure. But despite all these benefits, provisioning infrastructure as a service itself can't address the requirements of every workload. To ensure security, data sovereignty, and low latency, many of our customers are still investing in on-prem infrastructure and private clouds. And that's resulting in a multi-cloud environment, which makes cloud computing significantly more costly and definitely harder to manage. So one of the things that we also offer is data center as a service, which has really brought the power and benefit of on-prem infrastructure as a service capabilities to core data center and edge locations. Recently also, as part of our Dell Technologies world, a number of our modernization expansions to our products that we have wheeled out are all around how we are expanding our multi-cloud experiences across cyber recovery, data analytics, and our partner ecosystem. So if you look at the kind of focus that we have, Manu, around investing in the right technologies, particularly modernizing our own offerings so that our customers can get the best benefit out of building an agile data center infrastructure, that's at the core of what we are looking at. And these are just some examples of how we are continuing to stay invested and stay focused on this.
Just the same question to Bhavesh. Bhavesh, do you have any thoughts on what modernization tips and strategies you have for building an agile data center infrastructure?
Uh, well, I think there are experts around here, but my tip would be, and again at Firstsource we have already done this, right? So we have a lot of IoT devices in our data center, and it's a partnership between IT and admin, right? And I can today on my mobile phone monitor all the office locations across North America, UK, India, and that's all thanks to this effort that was put, right? So that's probably making it agile from the customer side. From the provider side, making it agile, and I know I hear stories, and my previous company keeps my colleagues keep telling me that there's a wait period of 6 months. So I don't know how to address this. There has been like a surge, and you also alluded to the report that somebody said, right, data center requirement in India is going to double, and that we are seeing, right? So how to make it agile would be to, yes, open regional centers, try and, because end of the day, cloud or hyperscalers, and due to regulations, they want to uh, work out of India, right? So the top 3 or 4. So when they take the capacity, customers or smaller enterprises do not get that opportunity, right? So creating a strategy around that would help. And yes, of course, using tools and technologies, making it all app driven would be the next step. And of course,
Absolutely.
physical security also will be very important. That cannot be compromised. I think that's one area again which will help with technologies that is coming up, like drones, or even smart cameras. So that's my view.
Absolutely. Interesting. Before I go to Sanjay for the last question, I want to ask Anil this. Anil, agility and speed of delivery are key issues for today's IT teams and as organizations adopt more hybrid infrastructures. Many legacy data center architectures are unable to meet those objectives. How can they overcome these challenges?
Well, see, let me talk from purely a data center perspective. We have to understand how a data center is different from a server. So while the offices that we sit with, they are made human friendly. Human friendly means a lot of air circulation, a lot of sunlight has to percolate inside the area. When you make a data center, then you make it server friendly. Server friendly means fresh air means more oxidation. You don't want fresh air. You want less of carbon nitrous coming in, and you want less of heat coming in. So from a data center perspective, the agility of a DC floor is what varying capacity of power could you supply per square feet? What varying capacity of cooling could you take out from it? And what is your PUE that you could maintain across this variation? It can be hot air, cold air pre-built containments. It can be the way you allow the amount of cooling to increase or decrease. And then how do you monitor and manage all of this dynamically, which is where the apps come in. So traditional data centers, if you see, we made floor spaces. I mean, I've been part of telcos and all. So we used to take 1.8 or 2.4 kW consumed and construct spaces, and whatever went in resided there between 7 years to 10 years. But now, if you see a highly dense cloud rack could go as high as 20 kW. The same thing in a network rack could be as low as 2 kW. And this power density is what you have to cater, because you don't know which of the customer, which bring in which type of equipment. And you can't wait, you can't build it at that time. So there is no uniformity there, and this is the variation that you have to cater. The
Interesting.
second thing which comes in and around this is how do you then ensure the efficiency? So while you may have ready a inventory and these variations may lead to losses, but then you need to have sufficient amount of efficiency. And that is where the design aspects comes in. Your floor to ceiling height, your heat load, your heat dissipation along the walls, the type of pahu, the chillers, etc. that you use. A very simple example, let us say we have heard of 5, 10, 30. We had made data centers of 40 megawatts. Just now we have commissioned a GIS substation in Mumbai, which is like 300 megawatts. Now, why would I convert 300 megawatts with something like a state grid system to a city into a building? So it is these type of agilities which are creeping up in the basic DC design, which are now yielding results in terms of web scale data center or an enterprise data center or a network rooms that can now be catered from them. And similar investment would be coming in the mechanical side of the things. Similar investments would be coming in terms of the architecture side of the things. So this is what is happening from a core DC perspective for this idea.
Absolutely. We'll soon start taking questions from the audience. I have one last question to Sanjay here, and then we'll turn to the questions. I've already got a few questions, so please feel free to send in some more. Sanjay, to you, what are the various challenges in building networks for agility?
Hi. I'm the least person in this panelists to answer this question, least qualified person. Anyway, I will try and attempt this. From my observations, I think the biggest challenge in network agility is the resistance to change. Because when your network is working smoothly, everything is going as it is, I don't think anybody wants to mess around with it and try and do that. To do network agility means you're doing new configurations, new network devices, new services, etc., coming into play. The configuration part, etc., taking the downtime, the service window, and coordination with multiple departments is a huge challenge. I've myself seen when you're trying to configure a new device at one of these locations, and it takes, forget about days, it takes about weeks to get permissions and approvals to be able to do that and take a small downtime. Third, I think, are the skill sets, which are quite, I think in terms of the skill sets, we've been used to a very manual kind of networking. How do we configure networks and how we change the networks? So in terms of the newer technologies which is coming into the network side, I think there's a lack of skill sets also, which is there. So broadly speaking, I think from an outsider's perspective, because I'm not hands-on on this, but that's what I see would be the major challenges which are coming into, deploying network agility.
Absolutely. We'll start taking questions. So first question is from Mr. MV Manjunath Srivatsa. Do you think with the government encouraging more data centers within the country, more companies will be encouraged to go for hybrid cloud, as localization and data privacy issues will be partially addressed? Anybody would like to answer that question?
Yeah, I can take a shot at that, and then maybe I'll let the other
Please go ahead.
panelists also. So I think someone famously said that data is the new oil. And if you think about what the government's vision is in incentivizing data center build-outs in India, there are many aspects to it, right? At the very least, it's the question of why should we store our data in the US or in Singapore and suffer the latency of networks when we can have it here and serve it locally? We ourselves are a very large data consuming country today, with all of the mobile subscribers, the applications, the local developers, and the local ecosystems that we have that is driving all of this data, right? So it makes sense to have data local and in India just because of the consumer developer equation. The second part of it is the ability to have access to data also determines your ability to then act on it and then to be able to make sense out of it. Now, I agree, not all data is public, but at the end of the day, ownership of data in this day and age, when you're able to run analytics, AI, ML algorithms on top of it, creates better learning, better automation, better outcomes for automation when you want it to. And thirdly, there's obviously the aspect of sovereignty and national security, even, right? You need to have access to data as a country when you need it to be able to protect ourselves. And I think that's the underlying truth. So if you consider these three things, I think there is a lot of advantages for companies to have and store their data locally, and that's where we're headed. So I'll leave it to the other panelists also to add to this.
Right. Anybody else would like to add to that point? No? Okay. So we'll go to the next question, and that's come from Nagraj. Mr. Nagraj, considering the CAPEX, OPEX comparison, can we enable private cloud for such large enterprises? How beneficial is it?
So let me take a stab at it. Then, so I think it all depends on the use case, Nagaraj, right? So there are specific use cases where it makes perfect sense to have a private cloud, and there are use cases which are meant to be public, and then there is hybrid cloud. So what is in our review with all of the various use cases, you have the flexibility to use an as a service model, right, which enables you to go up and down on the infrastructure on a need basis, and that is the best possible thing that you could consider. Whereas a private cloud will only give you right solution for a specific use case, a public cloud will give you a right solution for a specific use case. Going with an as a service kind of a model will enable you to go up and down and scale on the infrastructure on a need basis. So in the current multi-cloud hybrid cloud environment, this is probably one of the best options to consider, considering the capex and the opex models.
Understood. Anybody else would like to take a shot at this? Bhavesh?
I think it was covered, but I don't have any additional comments on this question.
Understood. Okay. Um, Right. Moving on to the third question, and this has come from Mr. Sudesh. Does building agile data centers inflate the customer slash client cost? Uh, to role of agile data centers in banking and medical sectors. I think a lot of people can answer this. Sanjay, would you like to respond to this?
Okay, I'll take the first part. Uh, does building agile data centers inflate the customer client cost? Okay, it depends how you're looking at it. If you're looking at it only from the point of view as an upfront investment, yes, it does inflate cost. But the way I would look at it is from the point of view that if I did not have an agile data center, then there is a possibility, not possibility, there's a surety that I would lose out on a lot of business. And so when you compare the cost invested money upfront in the loss of business, so there is no cost associated in that context. So short answer is no, because you will be gaining new businesses, or you will not lose out in your business. So yes, it makes far more sense to upfront in an agile data center, which means having some spare capacities around on all aspects.
I think Bhavesh wanted to add to this. Bhavesh, your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So I'll quickly also add to the private cloud because some a point occurred, and we talked about repatriation on the public cloud and how having a private and a public both makes sense. And a lot of large banks are doing that, right? So the provisioning is faster. You get all the advantages. You get a cloud-like experience on the within your private setup. So that's one other advantage, and of course the capex advantage for banks also stays. For this one, where the question is on agile data centers, and obviously there's no free lunch. Everything comes with a cost. So the solution and the technologies hopefully will pay for itself, right? But there will be an initial investment, and then you can reduce and automate and then improve, right? So either you improve on savings or you have a better customer experience, but something will give. And that's where I feel, yes, initially the agile data centers will come with a cost. There's an investment in technology which needs to be uh, considered for the total cost of ownership, and then probably within a few, whatever is the time frame, can be recovered.
Right. Harnath, would you like to respond to that? Does building agile data centers inflate the customer client cost?
No, I think there are two ways of looking at it. One, obviously, when you're trying to build your own data center, it kind of involves a bit of expenses, primarily because you're trying to bring up the whole data center per se, or you're trying to acquire infrastructure to run your data center. The other way of looking at it is there are financing models that are available when you're trying to build the data center, where you don't need to really invest into the infrastructure. You can actually partner with an organization which can provide you infrastructure and possibly some additional capacity. And to Bhavesh's point, there's no free lunch, but certainly you can work out the models where the additional capacity can be provisioned and can be used only when you require. You don't really need to pay upfront. And those models certainly work well, especially when you're trying to look at the repatriation and when you're trying to come back from cloud to the on-premise, or you want to stay on-premise for certain workloads, which requires you to stay put. And these models come handy, especially when you're trying to hit a peak. I mean, you go through peaks and troughs depending on the type of application you're running. It can address your peak requirement. So to answer your question, yes, it increases your cost to an extent. But obviously, there are better models available from a financing perspective, which can really support you in case you're trying to build an agile data center or data center.
Right. Yeah. We have a question from Manju. Can you, and I think this is sort of open to everyone. Can you share some ideas on what the esteemed panel members have implemented on sustainability and green data center initiatives? And green data center initiatives they have undertaken in their companies. Anyone have implemented algorithmic efficiency to reduce computing load and thus lowering heat load in DC? Wow, I think all of you can respond to this. Who likes to go first?
So let me take that first. Okay, one, I think, it can be as simple as putting up infrastructure monitoring solution on top of your data center, or basically within the data center you can practically monitor every aspect of the data center, primarily when you're running, be it heat or is it or power consumption, or any variable that can potentially increase the at least from a sustainability point of view, it can have it can have an impact, not only sustainability but also from an availability point of view. So, and clubbed with AI, you can actually have the monitoring being done through or practically can monitor on a mobile device, right? That's one. Second is when you have I think I did mention this earlier. If you have legacy infrastructure that you're hosting in your data center, so there's no point running it beyond a point. You can potentially evaluate what is it that can be retired, and you can bring in more modern infrastructure which can give you better power, better capacity, and at a lower cost of running, which is basically power consumption and cooling. So I think these are the two things that you can consider when you are looking at sustainability, at least the basics. Obviously there are better ways of doing it. Anil can talk about it because he runs the data center business, but I think purely from a consumer perspective, I think these are the key points I can think of.
I think we're running short on time. Anil, would you like to respond to this, and then we can wrap up the session today?
Yeah, sure. So from
Right,
a
Sanjay will also need to come in after this. Yeah.
yeah, so with sustainability, there were 3-4 key things that we do. First is, for example, when we put the GIS station in Mumbai, we are drawing 300 megawatt power, or will draw the 300 megawatt power for the data center campus. We are also building a 400 megawatt offset plant of solar. So at least one third of the energy, or we are expecting between 8 hours on an average, will come in through a green energy source. The second I had briefly harped upon, which was the reuse of the water. So instead of using potable water, we are filtering the water from the MLD or treatment plants and reusing that for our cooling. The third is, of course, when you build data centers, you erupt or you dig and you remove the soil and the local microorganisms and all. So the way we do it is we take up nearby landfill sites, we put in this soil top cover, and we sponsor the greening of it, like a Miyawaki small forest for the next 10 years, so that ecosystem still remains. It can't remain in the same building, but it does remain in the nearby. And last but not the least is the PUE. Just to understand, let's say India is more of coal power producing. So for every 100 units of coal that you burn, you actually put in power at 17 units, or 1:5, 1:6 ratio. And then when you run a DC, which is not at PUE 2, at a PUE 1.2, 1.4, you actually end up doing a lot of carbon credits. And all this comes while you have said about algorithm programming. For us, it's programs. We deploy those softwares, we monitor those standards as hardened out, and then they give us indications. Okay, you can save here, you can save here, right? And that's how this whole system then works out the PUE. So overall, it's a PUE counter, that how much raw power you are bringing and how much of it is getting utilized in compute and how much is wasted. And as you start to draw this ratio lower and lower and lower, it starts to yield all these results. So that's from a data center perspective.
Absolutely. Sanjay, you wanted to respond to this?
Yeah, I mean, I typed in before. You said it was the last comment or whatever, but anyway, I'll quickly add to this point about the compute load. The reality is most servers today, if you look at the CPU utilizations, operate anywhere between 30% to 40% CPU utilization. The reality is one server operating at 60% CPU utilization consumes about 45% less power than two servers operating at 30%. So the objective should be to identify the underutilized servers and consolidate them, and which fundamentally means, I think, which Harnath mentioned, was to be able to look at the power consumption patterns at the device level. Once you're able to do that, you will be able to identify which servers are underutilized and therefore would be able to consolidate and have a substantial amount of savings. So that's the short add-on I wanted to give.
On that note, from all of us at Forbes India, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We hope you continue to stay safe. And thank you, everybody.
Forbes India and Legrand present Data-Driven World. Focus, ideate, innovate, enable.